The sound of a solitary gunshot echoed across the vast Wyoming prairie, sending flocks of startled birds into the evening sky as Katherine Morgan clutched her bleeding shoulder and stumbled through the tall grass. Her once pristine blue traveling dress was now torn and stained with dirt and blood, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins as she forced herself forward. She had to get away from Hollow Creek, away from the men who'd killed her father and burned everything she'd ever known to the ground. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape as Katherine's strength began to falter. 3 days of running with little food or water had taken its toll. Her vision blurred as she crested a small hill, and there, silhouetted against the crimson sky, was the unmistakable figure of a rider. "Please," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't possibly hear her from this distance. "Please be someone kind." Then the darkness claimed her. Flynn Thornton had been riding the same stretch of Wyoming territory since dawn, searching for strays from his small cattle operation. The summer of 1878 had been unforgiving drought followed by sudden torrential rains that scattered his herd across miles of open country. At 26, Flynn had spent nearly half his life in the saddle, but days like this made him question his choice to stake a claim so far from civilization. He was about to turn back toward his modest ranch when Samson, his steady buckskin gelding, suddenly stopped and tossed his head. Flynn's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver on his hip as he scanned the horizon. Years in this untamed country had taught him to trust his horse's instincts. That's when he spotted her, a crumpled heap of blue fabric against the golden prairie grass. "Whoa, boy," Flynn murmured, dismounting with practiced ease. He approached cautiously, mindful that ambush tactics weren't uncommon in these parts. But as he drew closer, he saw only a young woman, unconscious and injured. Flynn knelt beside her, noting the blood-soaked sleeve of her dress and the exhaustion etched in her face. Despite the dirt and disarray, he could see she was beautiful and in desperate trouble. "Miss," he said softly, touching her wrist to check for a pulse. Relief washed over him when he felt the faint but steady beat beneath his fingers. "Miss, can you hear me?" Katherine's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises the color of summer sage. She tried to speak, but managed only a dry, raspy cough before slipping back into unconsciousness. Flynn assessed his options quickly. His ranch was still a good 3 hours' ride away, and the woman clearly needed immediate care. Without hesitation, he gathered her gently in his arms and carried her to Samson. "Sorry, boy," Flynn said as he carefully lifted Katherine onto the saddle. "Looks like we've got precious cargo." Flynn secured her carefully, making sure she wouldn't fall. When he was satisfied she was stable, he took Samson's reins and began walking beside the horse, leading them toward home as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Hang on, miss," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "I'll get you somewhere safe." The journey was slow and arduous. Flynn stopped frequently to check on Katherine, offering water from his canteen whenever she stirred enough to swallow. Twice she opened her eyes, confusion and fear evident in her gaze before unconsciousness claimed her again. Night had fully descended by the time the small cluster of buildings that constituted Flynn's ranch came into view. A lantern burned in the window of the main cabin, and Flynn silently thanked Providence that his ranch hand, old Charlie Wilkins, had remembered to light it before turning in for the night. "Almost there," Flynn told Katherine as he led Samson up the gentle slope to the cabin. She stirred slightly at the sound of his voice but didn't wake. Flynn tied Samson to the hitching post and carefully lifted Katherine from the saddle. She was light in his arms, too light, and he wondered how long she'd been without proper food. He carried her into the cabin, where the warm glow of the lantern revealed the full extent of her disheveled state. Charlie, a wiry man in his 60s with a face weathered by decades in the elements, bolted upright from his doze in the corner chair. "Good Lord, boy. What you got there?" he exclaimed, quickly clearing the table of playing cards and coffee mugs. Found her collapsed about 3 hours right out, Flynn explained, gently laying Katherine on the cleared table. She's wounded shoulder, I think, and exhausted. Charlie's weathered face creased with concern as he examined the young woman. Gunshot, from the look of it. Clean through, at least. She's been running hard from something or someone. Flynn's jaw tightened. Get the medical supplies. I'll heat water. While Charlie gathered bandages and the limited medicines they kept on hand, Flynn stoked the fire and put a kettle on to boil. His mind raced with questions about the mysterious woman. Who had shot her? What had she been running from? And more importantly, would whoever it was come looking? Katherine stirred as Flynn carefully cut away the blood-stained sleeve of her dress. Her eyes opened, wide with panic, and she tried to sit up. Easy now, Flynn said gently, placing a steadying hand on her uninjured shoulder. You're safe here. Where her voice was barely audible, parched from dehydration. My ranch, about 20 miles northeast of Hollow Creek. Flynn offered her a cup of water, supporting her head as she drank. I'm Flynn Thornton. This is Charlie Wilkins. Katherine drank gratefully, then sank back, her eyes moving between the two men with wary assessment. Katherine Morgan, she finally said. They killed my father. Flynn and Charlie exchanged glances. Who did, Miss Morgan? Flynn asked. But Katherine's eyes had already closed again, her body surrendering once more to exhaustion. Flynn and Charlie worked methodically to clean and bandage Katherine's wound. It was indeed a gunshot, as Charlie had suspected, but mercifully it had passed through the fleshy part of her upper arm without hitting bone. She's lucky, Charlie commented as he tied off the bandage. Bullet missed anything vital. Fever's the danger now. Flynn nodded grimly. I'll take first watch. Get some sleep, Charlie. The old ranch hand hesitated, then said, You know trouble's likely following her, don't you? I know, Flynn replied, checking that his revolver was loaded. But I couldn't just leave her out there. Charlie shook his head with a hint of a smile. Your pa raised you too decent for your own good. He shuffled off to his small adjoining room, leaving Flynn alone with the unconscious woman. Flynn carried Katherine to his bed, covering her with a clean quilt before settling into a chair beside her. Outside, the Wyoming night was alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. Inside, there was only the soft rhythm of Katherine's breathing and the occasional crackle from the fire. As he watched over her, Flynn couldn't help but notice the fine details of her face-high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and lips that, even chapped from exposure, were perfectly shaped. Her chestnut hair, now freed completely from its pins, spilled across his pillow in waves. What happened to you, Katherine Morgan? He whispered to the quiet room. Katherine's fever broke just before dawn. Flynn, who had dozed off in his chair, woke to find her watching him with those remarkable sage-green eyes. You walked beside your horse, she said softly. You gave me the saddle and walked all that way. Flynn felt heat rise to his face. Wasn't much of a choice. You needed the rest more than I did. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Flynn, please. Flynn, she repeated, and he was surprised by how much he liked hearing his name in her voice. She attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement disturbed her wounded shoulder. Flynn quickly moved to help her, arranging pillows behind her back for support. How long have I been here? She asked. Just the night. It's barely sunrise now. Flynn poured a fresh cup of water and offered it to her. Think you could manage some food soon? Charlie makes a decent porridge. Katherine nodded, accepting the water gratefully. After she'd drunk her fill, she looked at Flynn with a more focused gaze. I need to tell you what happened. You and your friend could be in danger by helping me. Flynn pulled his chair closer to the bed. I figured as much. Bullet wounds usually come with stories. Katherine took a deep breath. My father was Edwin Morgan. He owned the general store in Hollow Creek. Flynn nodded. He'd been to Hollow Creek a few times to trade supplies but didn't recall meeting either Katherine or her father. 3 days ago, a man named Victor Holcomb came to town with his gang, she continued, her voice growing tighter. He claims to represent Western Coal and Rail. They've been buying or taking land all along the proposed railway route. I've heard rumors about them, Flynn said grimly. Strong-arm tactics to secure right-of-way for the new line. They're worse than rumors. Katherine's hand trembled slightly as she set down the water cup. My father refused to sell our store and home. It's been in our family since the town was founded. That night, they came back. Her voice broke. They shot him in front of me. Said it was a warning to anyone else who wouldn't cooperate. Flynn's jaw tightened with anger. And they shot you too? Katherine shook her head. That came later. They locked me in our storeroom. Said they'd return for me in the morning. Holcomb had decided I would make a suitable companion for him. Her expression hardened with disgust. I escaped through the back window that night. When they discovered me missing the next morning, they started hunting me. One of them caught up with me yesterday at dawn. I managed to get away after he shot me, but I knew I couldn't keep running much longer. Flynn stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. These men, they'll pay for what they've done. Katherine caught his wrist with surprising strength. No, Flynn. They're killers, all of them. 5 men, well-armed and without conscience. I won't have more blood on my hands. Their eyes met, and Flynn saw not just fear in hers, but fierce determination. Reluctantly, he sat back down. What will you do? He asked. Katherine released his wrist. I need to get to Cheyenne. My uncle is a judge there. He can help bring legal action against Holcomb and his men. Cheyenne's 4 days hard ride from here, Flynn said, calculating quickly. And if these men are searching for you, I know it's dangerous, she interrupted. But I can't stay here and bring trouble to your door. Once I've rested today, I'll move on. Flynn shook his head firmly. Not with that shoulder, you won't. And certainly not alone. He stood again, his decision made. I'll take you to Cheyenne myself. You can't, Katherine protested. Your ranch. Charlie can manage for a week, Flynn replied. He's been running cattle since before I was born. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Charlie appeared in the doorway, his gray hair sticking up in all directions. Heard voices. Good to see you awake, Miss Morgan. Flynn quickly explained the situation to Charlie, who listened with growing concern. Holcomb, you say? Charlie spat. That snake's been causing trouble all over the territory. Heard he burned out the Wilsons over near Twin Rivers last month. All the more reason to get Miss Morgan to Cheyenne quickly, Flynn said. Charlie nodded. I'll pack provisions. You two should leave by midday. Take the north route through the hills. Less chance of being spotted that way. Katherine looked between the two men, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Why would you risk yourselves for a stranger? Charlie snorted. Way I see it, miss, decent folks have to stick together out here. Otherwise, men like Holcomb win. Flynn didn't add that there was something about Katherine Morgan that made him want to protect her, something that went beyond basic human decency. Instead, he simply said, try to rest a bit more. We've got preparations to make. By mid-morning, Katherine had eaten a bowl of Charlie's surprisingly tasty porridge and changed into a spare shirt and trousers Flynn provided. The clothes hung loosely on her frame, but they were clean and would be more practical for hard riding than her torn dress. I've never worn men's clothing before, she admitted, emerging from the bedroom with the shirt sleeves rolled up and the trousers secured with a length of rope. Despite the ill-fitting garments, she carried herself with dignity that Flynn couldn't help but admire. Suits you, he said with a small smile. Practical for the journey ahead. Charlie had prepared saddlebags with food, water, and medical supplies. He'd also found a wide-brimmed hat for Katherine to protect her from the sun. Take the paint mare for the lady, Charlie advised as they loaded the horses. Daisy's steady and has good endurance. Flynn helped Katherine mount, careful of her injured shoulder, then swung himself up onto Samson. Charlie handed him a rifle in addition to the revolver already on his hip. "Keep your eyes sharp," the old ranch hand warned. "Those hills can hide more than just deer." Katherine leaned down from her saddle to clasp Charlie's weathered hand. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Wilkins." Charlie patted her hand awkwardly. "You just come back to visit when this is all settled, you hear? Gets lonely with just this grumpy cowboy for company." Flynn rolled his eyes, but smiled at his old friend. "We'll be back in a week or so. Try not to burn the place down while I'm gone." With final farewells, Flynn and Katherine set out, heading northeast toward a pass through the low mountain range that separated Flynn's ranch from the main trail to Cheyenne. The day was clear and warm, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sagebrush and wildflowers. They rode side by side when the terrain allowed, Flynn constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. Katherine sat tall in her saddle despite her injury, and Flynn found himself impressed by her resilience. "You ride well," he observed as they navigated a rocky incline. "My father taught me," she replied with a sad smile. "He said every woman in Wyoming should know how to handle a horse and a rifle." "Wise man," Flynn said. "Was it just the two of you?" Katherine nodded. "My mother died when I was 12. Influenza. After that, it was just Papa and me running the store." She was quiet for a moment before asking, "What about your family?" "My father brought us out here from Missouri when I was 10. He and my mother built the ranch from nothing." Flynn's voice softened with memory. "Lost them both 2 winters ago. Fever took my mother and my father. Well, his heart gave out a month later. Charlie says he died of heartbreak more than anything else." "I'm sorry," Katherine said with genuine sympathy. "They sound like remarkable people." They were. Flynn adjusted his hat against the midday sun. "They would have liked you, I think." The words slipped out before he could consider them, and he felt heat rise to his face again. But Katherine's smile in response made his embarrassment worthwhile. They made good progress throughout the day, stopping briefly to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. By late afternoon, they'd reached the pass. Flynn had been aiming for a narrow trail winding between 2 steep hillsides covered in pine and aspen. "We'll camp in the clearing on the other side," Flynn said as they began the ascent. "There's a spring there and good cover." Katherine nodded, her face showing signs of fatigue, though she hadn't complained once. Flynn admired her determination, even as he worried about her pushing herself too hard with her injury. They were halfway through the pass when Samson suddenly tensed beneath Flynn, ears pricked forward. At almost the same instant, Flynn caught sight of movement among the trees ahead. "Katherine," he said quietly, "when I give the word, turn your horse and ride back the way we came. Fast as you can." Her eyes widened, but she nodded, gathering her reins more firmly. Flynn casually moved his hand to his rifle. Before he could give the signal, however, a shot rang out, sending rock fragments flying as the bullet struck the path just ahead of them. "Go!" Flynn shouted, swinging his rifle up and firing in the direction of the ambush as Katherine wheeled her horse around. 3 riders emerged from the trees, guns drawn. Flynn recognized the type immediately: hardened men who killed for pay. Holcomb's men, undoubtedly. Flynn fired again, catching one of the riders in the shoulder and sending him tumbling from his horse. The other 2 split up, one pursuing Katherine while the other charged toward Flynn. With a quick decision, Flynn turned Samson and galloped after Katherine and her pursuer. He couldn't fight all 3 men effectively, but he could at least ensure Katherine wasn't captured. He caught up to them quickly, the paint mare being no match in speed for the outlaw's larger mount. The man was closing in on Katherine, reaching out to grab her reins, when Flynn leveled his rifle and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to distract the pursuer. The man turned in his saddle, firing wildly at Flynn, who ducked low over Samson's neck. Taking advantage of the distraction, Katherine urged her mare off the trail and into the denser trees where the larger horse would have more difficulty following. Flynn stayed on the trail, becoming the more obvious target. The strategy worked. The outlaw abandoned his pursuit of Katherine to focus on Flynn. They exchanged shots as they galloped down the twisting path, neither finding their mark in the chaos of the chase. Ahead, Flynn spotted a sharp bend in the trail with a steep drop-off beyond. Making a split-second decision, he spurred Samson to greater speed, rounding the bend and then immediately pulling the horse behind a large boulder. When the pursuer came racing around the curve seconds later, Flynn was waiting. He launched himself from his hiding place, tackling the man from his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling perilously close to the edge of the drop. The outlaw was strong and fought viciously, landing a solid punch to Flynn's jaw before Flynn could pin him. They grappled in the dirt, each trying to reach for their weapons. Flynn managed to slam the man's gun hand against a rock, sending his revolver skittering away. With a roar of effort, Flynn finally gained the upper hand, delivering a powerful blow that left the outlaw dazed. Flynn quickly bound the man's hands with his own bandana. "Who else is looking for her?" Flynn demanded. The outlaw spat blood. "Holcomb's got men all over this territory. You're dead already. You just don't know it yet." Flynn's response was cut short by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. He drew his revolver, ready for another fight, but instead saw Katherine emerging from the trees, leading both their horses. "There's another one coming," she said urgently. "I circled back when I heard the fighting stop." Flynn quickly gagged the bound outlaw and dragged him further from the trail, concealing him behind brush. Then he mounted Samson and gestured for Katherine to follow him off the path and into the cover of the forest. They rode hard for nearly an hour, taking a roundabout route that Flynn hoped would throw off any pursuit. Eventually, they reached a small, hidden valley with a clear stream running through it, one of Flynn's secret spots that even Charlie didn't know about. "We should be safe here for the night," Flynn said as they dismounted in the gathering dusk. "No one knows about this place." Katherine nodded, then suddenly swayed on her feet. Flynn was at her side instantly, supporting her with an arm around her waist. "Your wound's bleeding again," he said, noticing the dark stains spreading on her shirt. "Let me see to it." He helped her sit against a tree trunk, then retrieved medical supplies from his saddlebag. As gently as possible, he removed the blood-soaked bandage from her shoulder. "The ride reopened it," he explained, cleaning the wound carefully. "But it doesn't look infected. That's something to be thankful for." Katherine watched his face as he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You've done this before," she observed. "Ranch life comes with its share of injuries," Flynn replied, applying a fresh bandage. "Though usually I'm patching up Charlie or myself, not a beautiful woman." He realized what he'd said only when Katherine's cheeks flushed pink in the fading light. "I mean, that is, thank you," she said softly, saving him from his stammering. "Not just for the compliment, but for everything. You've risked your life for me today, and you barely know me." Flynn finished securing the bandage, his fingers lingering perhaps longer than necessary on her arm. "I know enough," he said simply. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the danger they faced seemed to recede. There was something growing between them, something neither had anticipated, but both could feel. The spell was broken by the distant howl of a coyote. Flynn reluctantly pulled away to set up their small camp, gathering firewood and preparing a cold supper from their provisions. They couldn't risk a fire, not with Holcomb's men potentially still searching for them. As night fell completely, they sat side by side beneath a blanket of stars, their shoulders just touching. Flynn told Katherine about his plans for the ranch, the improvements he wanted to make, the small orchard he'd started the previous spring. Katherine spoke of her life in Hollow Creek, the books she loved to read, and her dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher someday. "My uncle once offered to send me to a teacher's college in Denver," she said. "But I couldn't leave my father alone." You still could, Flynn suggested. After this is all settled. Katherine was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps. Though I'm not sure what settled will look like now. Everything I knew is gone. On impulse, Flynn took her hand. Not everything. You're still here. Still fighting. She turned to look at him, her face silvered by moonlight. Why do I feel like I've known you longer than a day, Flynn Thornton? Flynn squeezed her hand gently. Some people, you just recognize when you meet them, like you've been waiting for them without knowing it. The air between them seemed to grow warmer, charged with unspoken feelings. Flynn found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he couldn't resist even if he'd wanted to. Their first kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question asked and answered in the same moment. When they parted, Katherine's eyes remained closed for a heartbeat, her lips curved in a smile that made Flynn's chest ache with sudden longing. We should rest, he said reluctantly. Tomorrow will be another long day. Katherine nodded, but neither moved to separate. Eventually, they arranged their bedrolls side by side, and Flynn watched as Katherine drifted to sleep, her face peaceful despite all she'd endured. Only when her breathing had deepened did he allow himself to close his eyes, one hand on his revolver, the other just touching hers in the space between them. Morning came with a heavy mist shrouding the valley. Flynn woke first, instantly alert to their surroundings. Nothing seemed amiss, but years on the frontier had taught him caution. He rose silently, checking the horses and scouting the perimeter of their small camp before returning to find Katherine awake and folding her bedroll. No sign of trouble, he reported, offering her jerky and dried apples for breakfast. We should make Cheyenne by tomorrow evening if we push on. They ate quickly and prepared to depart. As Flynn helped Katherine mount, she winced slightly, but assured him her shoulder was much improved. I'll need to learn to shoot with my left hand if this keeps up, she joked. Flynn raised an eyebrow. So, you do know how to handle a rifle like your father taught? I can hit what I aim at, she replied with a hint of pride. Papa made sure of that. Flynn grinned as he swung up onto Samson. Remind me never to cross you, Katherine Morgan. They set off at a steady pace, keeping to the cover of trees and valleys where possible. The land gradually changed around them, the rugged hills giving way to more open plains as they approached the eastern side of the territory. By midday, they'd covered significant ground without incident. Flynn began to hope they might have lost their pursuers entirely. They stopped briefly near a stream to water the horses and stretch their legs. As Katherine filled their canteens, Flynn studied the map he'd brought, planning their route for the remainder of the day. They were making good time, perhaps too good to stop for the night. If they pushed on, they might reach the outskirts of Cheyenne before dawn. He was about to suggest this to Katherine when the crack of a rifle shot shattered the quiet. Flynn dropped to the ground, pulling Katherine down with him as a bullet splintered the tree behind them. Stay low, he ordered, drawing his revolver and scanning the surrounding terrain. Another shot kicked up dirt near his boot. There, Katherine whispered, pointing to a ridge about 200 yards away where a glint of metal betrayed the shooter's position. Flynn nodded. I count at least 2 rifles. We need to move before they can adjust their aim. Keeping close to the ground, they crawled toward the horses, which were fortunately sheltered behind a cluster of rocks. Just as they reached them, 3 riders appeared at the far end of the clearing, approaching fast. It's them Holcomb's men, Katherine said, her face pale but determined. The one in front with a black hat, that's Victor Holcomb himself. Flynn helped Katherine onto her mare, then quickly mounted Samson. Ride hard and don't look back, he told her. I'll hold them off. No, Katherine seized his arm. I won't leave you to face them alone. Katherine, please, I lost my father to these men, she said fiercely. I won't lose you too. The declaration hung between them for a heartbeat before Flynn nodded grimly. Then we make our stand together. Follow me. He led them swiftly up a narrow game trail that twisted through dense underbrush and rocky outcroppings. The path was barely wide enough for their horses, forcing their pursuers to slow down and ride single file if they followed, which Flynn was counting on. Sure enough, when they reached a tight bend in the trail, Flynn signaled for Katherine to stop. Just beyond the curve, the path widened slightly into a small clearing before continuing up the hillside. When they come through that bend, they'll be bunched together and exposed, Flynn explained quickly. I'll take the first shot. You cover me if I miss. Katherine nodded, accepting the rifle he handed her and positioning herself behind a fallen log. Flynn took cover behind a large boulder, his revolver ready. They didn't have to wait long. The sound of horses approaching reached them, along with angry voices. When I find that girl, she'll wish I'd killed her outright. A deep voice growled. Holcomb, Flynn guessed. What about the cowboy? Another man asked. Gut him and leave him for the wolves, Holcomb replied coldly. Flynn and Katherine exchanged glances, their resolve hardening. This wasn't just about escape anymore, it was about survival. The first rider rounded the bend, not Holcomb, but one of his men. Flynn held his fire, waiting for the leader. A moment later, Holcomb himself appeared, his black hat identifying him clearly. Behind him came two more men, making four in total. Flynn aimed carefully and fired. His shot caught Holcomb in the arm, causing him to yell in pain and drop his rifle. The other men immediately drew their weapons, firing wildly into the surrounding forest as they sought cover. Katherine's shot rang out, striking one of the men in the leg. The precision of her aim confirmed her earlier claim about her shooting skills. A fierce exchange of gunfire followed. Flynn managed to wound another of Holcomb's men, but the fourth proved to be a skilled marksman, pinning Flynn behind his boulder with well-placed shots. We need to move, Flynn called to Katherine during a brief pause in the shooting. They're trying to flank us. Katherine nodded, firing once more before scrambling toward the horses they'd tied nearby. As she reached them, however, a shot rang out from an unexpected direction. Katherine cried out, dropping to one knee as blood blossomed on her already injured arm. Katherine! Flynn shouted, abandoning his cover to rush to her side. In that moment, Holcomb emerged from behind a tree, his revolver aimed directly at Flynn. That's far enough, cowboy, he snarled. Flynn froze, his mind racing for a way out. Holcomb's remaining men appeared, surrounding them completely. Miss Morgan, Holcomb said, his voice mockingly polite as he approached Katherine. You've led me on quite a chase. I admire your spirit, though not your judgment in companions. He cast a dismissive glance at Flynn. You murder my father, Katherine said, her voice steady despite her injury. You'll hang for that. Holcomb laughed. My dear, no one hangs men like me in this territory. We are the future railroads, coal, progress. Your father was simply in the way. So are witnesses, one of his men added, spitting tobacco juice near Flynn's boot. Holcomb nodded. Indeed. It's unfortunate, really. I had plans for you, Miss Morgan. His cold eyes moved to Flynn. Kill him first. Let her watch. Time seemed to slow as two of Holcomb's men raised their weapons. Flynn tensed, preparing to dive for Katherine, to shield her with his body if nothing else. Before anyone could fire, the thunderous sound of galloping horses filled the clearing. Flynn turned to see a group of riders cresting the hill behind them, rifles raised. U.S. Marshals. Drop your weapons, a commanding voice shouted. In the confusion, Flynn lunged for Holcomb, tackling him to the ground. Holcomb fought viciously, landing a solid punch to Flynn's ribs before Flynn pinned him, landing blows of his own until the land developer's face was bloodied. Enough, son. A firm hand landed on Flynn's shoulder. We've got him now. Flynn looked up to see a silver-haired marshal standing over him. Around the clearing, Holcomb's men were being disarmed and restrained by other lawmen. Flynn immediately turned to Katherine, who was being attended to by another marshal. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded, wincing as the marshal bandaged her fresh wound. "How did they find us?" she asked. The silver-haired marshal answered as he hauled Holcomb to his feet. Judge Morgan telegraphed every lawman in the territory when he heard about the trouble in Hollow Creek. "We've been hunting Holcomb for weeks." He looked at Katherine kindly. "Your uncle will be mighty relieved to see you, Miss Morgan." "My uncle knows?" Katherine asked in surprise. "Indeed he does. We were on our way to investigate when we ran into a rather battered fellow tied to a tree back yonder." The marshal glanced at Flynn with newfound respect. He was quite eager to tell us everything once we explained the alternatives. Flynn helped Katherine to her feet as the marshals prepared to transport their prisoners. "I guess we won't need to ride all the way to Cheyenne after all," he said. Katherine looked up at him, her eyes bright despite her exhaustion. "What will you do now?" "Take you somewhere safe to recover," he replied without hesitation. "Then get back to my ranch, I suppose." A shadow crossed her face. "I see." The marshal who'd been tending Katherine's arm approached them. "We'll escort you both to Cheyenne. Judge Morgan will want to see his niece, and he'll need statements from both of you for the trial." Flynn nodded his agreement, helping Katherine mount her horse once more. This time, though, he insisted on riding double with her, supporting her injured body against his chest as they set off with the marshal's party. The journey to Cheyenne passed more comfortably with the protection of the law. Katherine dozed against Flynn's shoulder for much of the ride, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion and stress of the past days. Flynn found himself contemplating the future with an unfamiliar uncertainty. He had responsibilities at the ranch, dreams he'd been working toward for years. Yet the thought of saying goodbye to Katherine left him with an ache he couldn't ignore. They reached Cheyenne the following afternoon. Judge Morgan, a distinguished man with the same sage-green eyes as his niece, was waiting at his impressive home when they arrived. His relief at seeing Katherine was palpable as he embraced her carefully, mindful of her injuries. "My dear girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I heard about what happened, I feared the worst." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "Papa fought so bravely, Uncle Robert. He wouldn't give in to them." "Just like his daughter," the judge said proudly before turning to Flynn. "And you must be the young man who saved her. I am forever in your debt, Mr. Thornton." Flynn shook the judge's offered hand. "Katherine saved herself, sir. I just provided a horse and some company along the way." Judge Morgan invited Flynn to stay at his home while Katherine recovered and the legal proceedings against Holcomb began. Flynn accepted, sending a telegram to Charlie to explain the situation and promising to return as soon as possible. The days that followed were filled with formal statements, meetings with prosecutors, and the beginnings of what promised to be a sensational trial. Holcomb's crimes extended far beyond Hollow Creek, and witnesses began arriving from across the territory to testify against him. Through it all, Flynn remained by Katherine's side, supporting her through the difficult process of recounting her father's murder. In the evenings, they found moments of peace in the judge's garden, talking about everything and nothing as their connection deepened. 1 week after their arrival in Cheyenne, as they sat together on a garden bench beneath the stars, Flynn finally voiced the question that had been weighing on him. "What will you do after the trial, Katherine?" "Your uncle mentioned the teachers' college in Denver again." Katherine was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that," she finally said. "There's a small school near Hollow Creek that needs a teacher. The children there deserve an education, especially now." She turned to face him, her expression earnest. "But I've also been thinking about a certain ranch that might need some improvements. An orchard that needs tending." Flynn's heart raced as he took her hands in his. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Katherine smiled, the first truly carefree smile he'd seen from her. "I'm saying that some people, you just recognize when you meet them, like you've been waiting for them without knowing it." Flynn pulled her gently into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he'd been holding back. When they finally parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Katherine Morgan," he whispered. "I think I have since the moment I found you in that prairie grass." "And I love you, Flynn Thornton," she replied. "Enough to know that wherever you are is where I belong." The trial of Victor Holcomb concluded 3 months later with a conviction and a sentence of hanging. Justice had been served, but for Flynn and Katherine, life had already moved forward. They were married in Judge Morgan's garden, with Charlie serving as Flynn's best man. The old ranch hand had grumbled about putting on formal clothes, but had tears in his eyes when he handed over the rings. After the ceremony, Flynn helped his new bride onto Samson, then mounted behind her for the journey back to the ranch that would now be their home together. "You know," Katherine said as they rode away from Cheyenne, "this reminds me of how we met. Except this time, I'm not unconscious." Flynn laughed, tightening his arms around her waist. "And this time, I'm not letting you go." As they rode toward the horizon and their future together, Flynn reflected on how a simple act of kindness, giving up his saddle to a stranger in need, had changed his life forever. Some might call it fate or providence, but Flynn preferred to think of it as the beginning of the greatest journey he would ever take, the journey of loving Katherine Morgan Thornton, come what may.